So let me ask you. Um, Certainly, economists are very learned people, but if we're talking about 16 Nobel economists, Sandy, it's safe to say these are some of the brightest amongst the brightest, right?
Yeah, the Nobel Prize winning economists, you would think, have been vetted by in a very special way and are viewed as leading thinkers in the field of economics. Yeah.
Okay, so what they said was this: Joe Biden economic agenda is vastly superior to Trump's. Nobel laureates explained in a letter. Inflation will soar once again if former President Donald Trump. This is not Earl Ingram and Sandy Williams. These are 16 of the brightest of the bright economists in this nation and across the earth who sent a letter, Sandy,
Hmm.
saying inflation will soar once again if former President Donald Trump wins back the White House. A group of 16 Nobel Prize winning economists have predicted in a letter obtained by Axios. President Joe Biden's economic agenda is vastly superior to that being put forward by presumptive GOP presidential nominee Trump, argued the Nobel laureates. A second Trump term would have a negative impact on the U.S.'s economy standing in the world and the destabilizing effect on U.S. domestic economy and his fiscally irresponsible budgets would ignite inflation that has come down remarkably fast in recent weeks, they warned. The letter was signed by, and these the names of inflation, a key political talking point ahead of the 2024 election, has leveled off following its peak in 2022. Trump's proposals to extend tax cuts, then introduce higher tariffs, including 10% on all imports and between 60% and 100% for products from China and Mexico, could hike it once again, uh, though the economist claims. Sandy, you say what to that?
Well, absolutely. I've been talking about that. Tariffs are very inflationary. If you put 100% tariff on electric vehicles, for instance, the price of electric vehicles, all electric vehicles, whether they're made in China or whether they're made in Mexico or whether they're made in the United States, the price of all of them will rise because of that protective tariff, which has reduced competition on the with respect to the price of electric vehicles. Well, that's true of everything. Well, when that happens, the American public that is paying the price is going to pay a higher price for things made in America as well as for the things that are imported to America. Okay, that's inflationary, number one. Number two, it's a tax that's paid not just on the imported good, but on all goods because of the higher price. It's essentially a tax. It's a tax that's flowing in the case of the American goods as a profit, additional profit to the manufacturer. But it's a regressive tax because it's paid, it's like a sales tax. Tariffs are like a sales tax. They increase the cost of goods. You pay for that increased cost of goods, so this notion that tariffs are a nifty source of revenue for the government and we can reduce income taxes. Number one, it's harebrained. Number two, it's very inflationary. The other thing that's inflationary is essentially all the policies that Trump had while he was in office, as well as the ones he's talking about now, massive tax cuts. He's talking about not terminating the tax cuts that were launched in 2017, which have a 2025 sunset, and most of them being for the middle class. But he wants them to continue, but he also wants to have additional tax cuts on the corporate tax and additional tax cuts to the wealthy. Well, an analysis shows that Donald Trump actually the two issues that Republicans want to talk about are deficits and inflation. Well, Donald Trump's policies are definitely inflationary, though all the ones he talks about are much more inflationary than the policies talked about by Joe Biden, which are essentially expenditures by the government in various areas, investing in the people of America, and many of his are funded actually. So the level of deficit of the policies he's talking about is much lower than the projected level of deficit that will be created by Donald Trump. But if you look at Donald Trump's history, he increased borrowing on the part of the United States during his term by $8.4 trillion in borrowing. He had 7.8 trillion in debt, but it required 8.4 trillion of additional borrowing. Uh, Biden has 4.3 trillion of borrowing, and if you look at what that money has been expended on, uh, you had about half of that money was for COVID relief, whereas Trump he had 8.4 trillion in borrowing, and less than half, much less than half, was for COVID relief. And so the fact is that if you just analyze the fiscal program, if you analyze the proposed policies of Donald Trump and compare it to Joe Biden, Donald Trump promises to violate the very issues that the Republican Party wants to run on. Donald Trump's policies are inflationary, very inflationary, and his policies will increase deficits materially.
Sandy, you have no reason uh, to fabricate anything. These are facts, right?
Yeah, these are facts, and that's what troubles me about the ability of people to talk out of both sides of their mouth politically. Because if the Republicans want to stand for financial and fiscal responsibility, then they ought to, and they ought to actually have policies that relate to it. But they're running a candidate who runs against it. He's a profligate spender, doesn't say no to anyone, and wants to reduce taxes to everyone. He's not only promising a chicken in every pot, but if you want a lobster, you can have a lobster in your pot.
Sandy, the fear once again is what these Nobel laureate economists had to say initially. And I'll read this sentence again. Joe Biden's economic agenda is vastly superior to Trump's. Now, you may say, well, look at how bad things are under Joe Biden. But what they're warning is things are, they're working and they're getting better. And what Joe Biden's economic agenda is acceptable. It's an acceptable way to get us where we need to be. That's what I'm reading from what those laureates are saying. But they're also warning that if Trump gets back in, we're going to head down the slope, barring, and what their verbiage was, barring recession, major damage will be done. And so as we watch our, things getting better slowly, if Trump gets enough, who is he listening to, Sandy, as his, as his economic advisors? Who are the economists that Donald Trump is listening to? Or is he making decisions himself because he's the best economist?
Well, I think in large part he would say that he relies on his gut,
I know.
which is kind of an unseemly concept. But uh, I think he relied on Peter Navarro, who was exposed in many ways during the term. Peter Navarro was a super tariff hawk, wanted to apply tariffs broadly, and the tariff policy that Trump implemented was very chaotic and introduced a great deal of chaos into our supply chain, and did not work with respect to the balance of payments. Okay, the balance of payments has not been more favorable since the tariff policies were implemented, and so I just think that we need to sit up and actually start thinking. Yes, I think deficits can't be unlimited and can't go on forever, but we then should not elect someone whose policies promise to increase the deficits. And the notion that the kind of policies that Trump is talking about and the kind of increased deficits that would result from it could somehow be offset by programmatic reductions is a totally fallacious
Well,
concept.
Sandy, the fear in all of this is you're an economist. For me to debate and argue with you about the economy and how the economy works would be the height of folly. So here we are with 16 Nobel laureate economists who have been talking to one another, Sandy, as they watch this thing unfold. And they said, we've got to do something. We've got to say something before this gets so far down the road. And they decided to write this letter, Sandy. To me, that's telling.
Well, we've had, I think, a lot of people try to warn us about the implications of the election of Donald Trump. And so some of them have related to his character, some of them related to his policies. And now these economists are pointing at economic policies. We have callers who want to talk about Larry Summers warning about the potential inflationary effect of the some of the expenditure programs in the early Biden years. But we now have what is clearly and undeniably a bunch of policies being discussed by Donald Trump, which promise, absolutely promise to be highly inflationary, increasing tariffs significantly, reducing taxes significantly, which will result in massively increased deficits, as well as both policies being highly inflationary.
Sandy, for those who are on the other side of, the equation uh, of this conversation and who think that we're just beating up on Donald Trump, no, that is not the fact that people are just beating up on Donald Trump. They're trying to warn uh, us about the major damage. Sandy, you talked about deficits, and other people talked about deficits, and they've come to say, well, deficits can be handled and we can deal with them. But this and what they are Sandy, they're talking about dire consequences for our nation if Donald Trump is put back in control of the finances of our nation.
Well, the finances of our nation require a great deal of attention, and we need to operate factually. We need to not operate based on the politics of promise, and the promise that is designed to secure votes directly. It's like I said, the chicken in every pot. I'm going to reduce your taxes. Isn't that attractive? I'm going to create more jobs by putting a tariff and claiming that the tariff is paid by the foreign country manufacturers who on whose goods the tariff is applied, when in fact economists will tell you that tariffs are basically paid by the consumer who buys the goods. Uh, you know, I, all of this needs to be carefully thought out. This should not be knee-jerk political reflex, and I'm afraid that's not what's happening. If we have a debate, it won't be possible during the debate to have a discussion that relates and gets down to the detail of the important policy implications of the policies being discussed. People talk about deficits and they attack and they want to say you're the party of the deficit. Well, number one, turns out factually that isn't true if you look at the last 50 years. And two, we need to talk about it and what we're going to do about it.